Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 6. In the last episode, we covered my journey with Johnson & Johnson Middle East. How I moved from Karachi back to Dubai with J&J, and then from Dubai to Saudi Arabia, and then how I had gone for my interviews in Montreal with Johnson & Johnson Canada, and my return to Saudi. And then, the offer that the J&J Canada team had made for me to join them as a product director, working on the women's health franchise in Montreal, which was an unbelievable opportunity for me. I did not want to be an immigrant that had to flip burgers when they arrived in the country. I was very, very fortunate and blessed to be able to go there with a job and to have my moving expenses, which are considerable, as you know. I believe the total expense of my move was close to $10,000 back in those days. All of that was covered by J&J, and so I landed from Jeddah, where the temperature was plus 30 degrees, and ended up in Montreal, where the temperature in January of 2002 was minus 40 degrees. So a bit of a shocker in terms of temperature. My body nearly shut down. I did not have the right clothing because the coldest weather clothing you can buy in the Middle East, or at least in those days, would be appropriate for a mild spring day in Montreal, not a minus 40 degree winter day, which is, it's beyond belief. So I reached there. I was staying at a motel initially, rented a car, drove to the J&J parking lot, made my way through the snow to the reception area, and in that short walk from the car to the reception area, I nearly froze to death. Anyway, got in. The head office was actually attached to the front of the factory, and it was on the east end of Montreal Island. So extremely French speaking. For those of you who don't know, Montreal has an east end and a west end, and the east island is mostly French and industrial, and the west island is mostly English speaking and largely residential. And then on both sides of the island, there's a north shore and a south shore. There are various bridges and tunnels that connect the island to the mainland, as it were, because Montreal is in the middle of a river. So the very first day, the team of Women's Health, Francois, Tineka, Marcella, these guys came to me and they said, "Hey, listen, Omar, we don't know you, but we think it would be a good idea if you survived the winter, so come with us." So they took me to a mall during the lunch break, and they basically helped me to buy a new coat, boots, warm socks, a toque, which is a beanie to cover your head, a scarf, gloves, basic warm weather, cold weather clothing. And it saved my life, literally. So, that's how my experience with J&J Canada started. It was an amazing opportunity. Working on women's health was very exciting because it was a very different category, much more evolved than Then in the Middle East, much broader number of products. We had all kinds of women's health products, including KY, lubricants, as well as tampons, pads, liners. I mean, the whole range. And it was fascinating getting to understand that category from a North American perspective. And it worked out really well. We did amazing things. KY was a highly profitable category for the business, and we grew sales by more than 70%. There was a relaunch happening of the KY brand, and it was just phenomenal. We were the sponsors of the Pride parade in Montreal, which is one of the largest in the world that year, and we had our own float, and we had a bet with our VP of marketing that if we grew sales that year by more than 50%, he would ride the float, and he did. He was a good sport. So it was just a wonderful experience. I used to travel a lot to the US, where our head office for J&J was in New Jersey, and working with global teams on certain projects, but also mostly focused on growing the women's health franchise along with the team in Canada. One of the most significant personal events of my life took place. My wife and daughter arrived in Canada a couple of months after me. I had, put a down payment on a house, and on the South Shore, actually, in an area called Boucherville, or Boucherville for you Anglophones, which is on the South Shore. And there was an island. There was a tunnel connecting the South Shore to the island. I believe the tunnel was called the La Fontaine Tunnel, old decrepit tunnel, but really, like, I was 7 kilometers away from work, and I could be back and forth because my wife and I were expecting our second child. And when we started appointments with pediatricians, prenatal appointments, we found that our son was going to be born with a birth condition. He was going to have a cleft lip and possibly a cleft palate as well. This is one of the most common birth defects in the world. I think 8 out of 1,000 kids are born with a cleft lip or palate, something like that. And so we found ourselves in Canada in this incredibly supportive system where basically healthcare is free, right, in Canada. So we started doing 2 sets of prenatal visits. We were doing the regular pediatrician visits, and then we were doing cleft lip or craniofacial plastic surgery visits as well. So, all covered by the government. 3 months later, Ibrahim was born. He did indeed have a cleft lip and palate. He had surgery at 3 months, then he had surgery at a year, then he had surgery at 3 years. It was amazing to me that we were in Canada 3 months before my son was due to be born. And anywhere he was born, he would have had to have surgery, right? It's just that we happen to be in Canada. And that's when I actually had a bit of a spiritual moment, and I spoke to God, and I said, you go ahead and plan. I was a guy who used to live his life in 5-year plans. 5 years after my MBA, we left Pakistan, 5 years in Dubai, and the plan was 5 years in Canada. And then at that point I just said, you know what, God, you make the plan. I am just gonna I'm going to stop planning. I'm just going to go with the flow. And I just started going with the flow. And I mean, call it what you will. That's just an epiphany that I had, and it kind of changed the way that I lived my life. And so, you know, my son was a beautiful baby, and he's a very handsome young man right now. And you know, I mean, God bless Canada. What else can I say? Those surgeries would have cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars anywhere else in the world. And the reality is, yeah, you can say, yeah, sure, but you paid for that in your taxes. And the answer is yes. I mean, we pay taxes everywhere, but what do we actually get in return, right? Nothing much. Anyway, we were in Montreal for 3 years. There was so much to learn about how business is done in North America. For one thing, one of the biggest differences between how we did business anywhere else that I had experienced so far and how they did business in North America was the amount of data that was available. I mean, we were literally getting retail audit data that was accurate to the nearest 10 units. It was insane, and it was, you know, you could actually run a promotion and see the lift in terms of sales by major sales partner, by channel, by customer. It was mind-blowing. And so the level of experimentation that you could do, and you know, the opportunities available to test and learn different ideas, different promotions, consumer promotions, trade promotions, was just phenomenal. I also saw firsthand the power of brands with really high gross margins, right? So KY at the time remains actually till today the brand with the single highest GP that I've ever worked with. I can't, you know, tell you a specific number, but I will tell you it was north of 90% as a gross margin, because there's really nothing in the product. It's petroleum jelly, water, a tube, and a box, and the product sold for $19.99. You know, it's hugely profitable. So when you focus on parts of a portfolio that are very profitable and you grow them, all of a sudden your overall portfolio profitability goes up, and you can see that in the numbers. This was also the first time that I started receiving company shares as part of my compensation. And so that was the first time actually that I got exposed to equity as a very powerful motivator in terms of comp. So yeah, your salary is there to, you know, kind of cover your needs and keep you whole so that, you know, you can live your life. But you don't really save money on a salary unless you're, you know, making $1 million a year and above. So the idea of the equity is you keep it, you hold it, and you watch it appreciate, and you have a vested interest in the growth and development of the company. And that really works phenomenally well. It really engenders a sense of ownership, real, literal sense of ownership in the business. And you know, you understand the link between what you're doing and how the company's doing. And so, you know, it's very powerful. The second thing I learned about, again, going from Pakistan and the Middle East, was saving for retirement. When you're young, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this video will not have any kind of retirement planning in their minds. Forget about an actual retirement plan. But even thinking about retirement, because you're like, oh, it's 30 years away. Oh, it's 40 years away. Oh, I never plan to retire. And that's fine. You can make a choice to not retire. But keep in mind that a dollar saved today is worth $100 10 years from now or 20 years from now. I'm not even exaggerating. Without getting to specifics, there are shares that I invested in as part of my registered retirement savings plan, or RSP in Canada, that I literally bought at $200 a share, and they went up to $2,500, and then they split, so they became 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, so you got more shares. They went back down to 400 or 500, they went back up again. So the way that the stock market works in the long term is there's a massive compounding effect, but the trick is you have to think about it long term. You have to not dip in and dip out continuously trying to make a short-term profit, unless of course you're a day trader, which is fine. That's a different kind of income stream, but that's a different thing to what I'm talking about. I'm talking about buying shares that you believe in the long term and holding on to them, for a number of years with a great deal of patience and perseverance. So sometimes you get shafted. Like, I held on to BlackBerry way too long. I was waiting for it to cross, I think, whatever, at the time it was approaching $1,000. And I told myself the minute it crosses 1,000, I'm going to sell. And it got to 950, and then it never went back. It just collapsed. And, the company was eventually sold to a private equity company. The BlackBerry self-inflicted pain is probably deserves a post on all its own. But, that was also the first time that I was introduced to the BlackBerry smartphone as it was just launching, right? BlackBerry was a Canadian company, and J&J signed up its management to receive the BlackBerries, and so we were among the first people to actually start using those blue brick devices with a tracker ball on the right-hand side. And you learned the addictive power of the smartphone, and this was 2002, 2003 that I'm talking about, right? So long time ago. But just switching on the phone after an aircraft landing and checking your email, it was mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. For everyone who's lived through that experience, to experience it for the first time, that rush, that feeling of, oh my God, I'm connected to the world, is just absolutely wow. And of course, Brick Breaker was one of the most addictive phone games ever designed. I used to play it incessantly. I actually broke the game. I crossed 1 million points on that game, and at one point I was rated in the top 20 players in the world because of the score that I managed to achieve. And then of course I stopped playing it because the tracker wheel actually gave me a real problem in my wrist, a problem which is with me till today. So anyway, a lot of firsts. The other thing I learned in moving to Canada was insurance. So we, in the rest of the world, outside of Europe and North America, we are very underinsured. We don't believe in insurance, just generally, and the end result is that we are often left exposed and vulnerable to what life may throw at us. I honestly think that North America has probably taken it too far. We're a little overinsured there, so you have life, you have critical illness, you have disability, you have personal effects, loss of car insurance, this, that, the other. I mean, insurance is expensive, and it's just a way of life in North America. So people are covered, and they're they just have a different view of the world because they are insured. This is something that you know, the developing South has a lot of catching up to do with. We are way behind in the insurance area, and I think that's a massive opportunity for us. So yeah, Canada was amazing. What happened, interestingly though, was that because we were living on the south shore of the island, we started losing touch with my daughter. She used to go to a theoretically bilingual daycare, but it was primarily French, and so she spoke only French. I spoke some French, so I could communicate with her. My wife didn't speak any French, so she could actually only communicate with my 2.5, 3-year-old daughter through me. And that was not a sustainable situation. So I started looking for a job in Toronto, in the English-speaking parts of Canada. And we used to drive down to Toronto. It was a 5-6 hour drive, occasionally just to meet friends. Most of our friends were in Toronto, and they would often curse us out for being in Montreal. And eventually I started looking for a job, and I was very lucky. I found an absolutely incredible job with Novartis Consumer Health as a senior brand manager, working on one of their cough and cold brands. And so we began the transition to Toronto. So April of 2004, I left J&J, and we actually started to move our stuff to Toronto. And we were basically going to move our stuff in a truck, but we were doing a couple of trips with a minivan to try and take down as much stuff as we could. And we were also putting an offer down on a house in Mississauga, and we were selling our house in Montreal at the same time. So it was a really hectic time. And during this time I had left J&J, not yet joined Novartis. I ended up in the hospital with an appendix that went really bad. I'll talk more about that in the next video, and when we'll cover my journey with Novartis in Canada and the US. And in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful, and I will talk to you soon. Have a good one. Bye.